Stage continued.
I declare the House in committee for further consideration of the infrastructure bill. Mr. Chairman.
Part four.
You got some words for me?
I have.
Order. The House and Committee for further consideration on the infrastructure bill. Members, when we last considered this bill, debate on Part 4 was in progress. Does some member want to take the call? Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And when the House was last debating Part 4, the Minister was making a number of comments which I believe members of this side, on this side of the House want to address. I think the Minister, in his comments on affordable housing in New Zealand and what the potential solutions might be, showed the very problem that we have with this government not taking the issue of affordable housing seriously. Because the Minister and the Chair, when he stood on his feet at the end of the last time we debated this, simply engaged in a vitriolic attack on members on this side of the House. Not once did he talk about affordable housing, Mr. Bridges. It's funny, isn't it? Simon Bridges over there didn't care about the personal attacks coming from his own side of the House. Didn't care about the personal attacks coming from his own side of the House. But when this opposition asked for transparent and responsible government, suddenly Mr. Bridges is outraged. So I think he might want to take a long, hard look in the mirror, because the opposition does require transparency and does require accountability, Mr. Bridges. When we come back to Part 4 of...
Order. Now let's just have a little more decorum. It's the first speech of the afternoon on the House and Committee. There will be opportunities for members who want to make their point to take a call. Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I advise Mr. Bridges he might want to scream at me from his own chair in the House in the future if he's going to barrack across the House like that. The issue of affordable housing is incredibly important, and the Minister and the Chair took a call towards the end of the last debate where he showed the very problems that New Zealanders are having with this government and taking the issue seriously, because as I was saying, all he was interested in doing was piling vitriol on members of this side of the House for daring to suggest that, number one, the repeal of the Affordable Housing Territorial Authorities Enabling Act should not have been hidden away in the infrastructure bill. It should not have been hidden away. Number two, it should have gone to a select committee so that we could have had a discussion about how perhaps the legislation could be improved, because I don't think that Labor did everything right in affordable housing. There was a lot more that we could have done. There was a lot more that we wanted to do, and we would have been very supportive of this piece of legislation going back to select committee in order to try and work on it, because this type of approach to affordable housing and the Affordable Housing Territorial Authorities Enabling Act that is being repealed in Part 4 of this legislation works very well overseas. And yes, the economy has changed in New Zealand, and yes, this type of mechanism works better in the type of situation that we had a few years ago, where you have high levels of development activity, difficulties in finding the available land to doing it. Yes. But we will one day get back into that situation. And so what are we doing? Because let me be clear, this was not a requirement on local authorities. They didn't have to use this if they didn't want to do it. It was another tool in the toolbox, if you like, to deal with affordable housing. Again, as I said, it was a tool that we would have been happy to have seen go back to Select Committee for further work if that's what the government felt should be done. But it wasn't compulsory. And what's happened is, because the economy has changed and because development activity has changed, the government's now said, well, we're just going to holus bolus throw it away and get rid of it. So what's going to happen when we go back into a situation of high development activity is that councils are going to be wishing that they had this type of this mechanism to be able to use, and it's going to take us forever to get it through Parliament, even given this government's approach to hurrying things through, to putting things through without select committee. It still takes time. And we're going to be in the situation again of trying to pass this legislation when there was no reason why it couldn't have been left in place, couldn't have been left in place. And that's why one of the SOPs in this part in my name is to actually remove Part 4 from this infrastructure bill. It shouldn't have been there in the first instance. It shouldn't have been hidden away in the infrastructure bill. But more importantly, there is no reason why it could not stay there. And we do, let's be honest, local authorities have to be part of the solution when it comes to affordable housing. Have to be part of the solution because they are integral in the supply of land. They are absolutely integral in that. You look at Māori land, zoned rural, very difficult to be able to get the kind of development on it that they want. Local authorities have to be part of the solution. We cannot do it without them. And so providing mechanisms like this which allow them the flexibility and more than that, Mr Chair, the certainty to know that they cannot be legally challenged when they do this, that they cannot be taken to court by a developer who says you do not have the powers to require me to provide affordable housing or to pay a levy which gets put towards affordable housing or to provide a certain number of houses for affordable housing. This would provide the legal certainty that yes, they do have the power to be able to do that. And Mr Chair, thank you, Mr Chair. And they would then be able to go forward knowing that they're not putting their ratepayers at some kind of risk of being taken to court and challenged by developers who have very deep pockets and who do not want to see this kind of affordable housing as part of their development. And I don't know why. I don't know who's gotten to the government on this issue. I don't know who's been in their ear, maybe who's said, you know, which big donators that we don't know about that go through the trust that the National Party have said to them, we don't like this because it's going to perhaps, we don't want to have to provide this, we're worried it might reduce the overall profit that we make on our developments. But the fact is, it doesn't matter what local authority you talk to, they will tell you affordable housing is an enormous issue. It is an enormous issue. From the smallest council like a Portakey District Council up to the biggest councils like Auckland City, Christchurch City, Wellington City, they will tell you affordable housing is a major issue and they know that they are going to be pivotal in any government response to addressing affordable housing. And yet here we are in Part 4 of this legislation taking away one of those tools. Could that tool be made better? Possibly, probably. We would be willing to work with the government to go back to Select Committee to find out what we could do to allay any of the concerns. And I noticed that when I go through the Housing New Zealand's report that we got given to us at Select Committee, which outlines the reasons why they did this, there were a lot of mays in there. There weren't a lot of wills. There was a lot of it may do this, it may do that, we don't know. Clearly, even the officials weren't certain that it was going to have the negative outcomes that the government seems so certain that it's going to have. So a lot more work could have been done in this area, and it's tragic that at a time when housing affordability continues to be one of the biggest issues in the country, we're here repealing affordable housing legislation. Put that on top of the fact that we've lost shared equity. We had a 2-year pilot which the 20 months of the 24 months of that 2-year pilot were under this national government, and what did they do? They told Housing New Zealand to stop promoting it. And then they complained about the low level of uptake and used that as an excuse to ditch the entire program altogether, despite the fact that, like this kind of legislation, these kind of powers for territorial authorities, shared equity is an integral part of the housing affordability mix in every single other country around the world. It has worked. And this has worked too. You know, in the United States, ironically, this kind of stuff is just considered par for the course in many states. You know, if there's a big development like a shopping mall, then it is just seen as a natural requirement that the developer will be made to, for example, provide workers' housing, to provide the infrastructure around that workers' housing, to provide affordable housing, and the citizens who live in those areas think that that is absolutely fair. That if someone is going to come in and they're going to use the land and they're going to use a lot of public resources, that it's only fair that they put something back in as well. Now, of course, you don't want to get to the situation where no one wants to do developments, but that hasn't happened in other countries where this type of legislation has been used. And I have to say, of course developers are going to say that they don't want this. They're not going to want to do anything like this which might impinge on the bottom line. Of course they're going to say that, and I would absolutely expect it, and it's absolutely their right to say that. But a government has to take a more critical approach than the one that we've seen here. And I noticed that the Minister of Housing is always saying, well, no one took it up. Well, I look at the advice from his own department, Housing New Zealand, which says since the Act was enacted in 2002, there has not been an opportunity for territorial authorities to implement it. So there hadn't been the opportunity. So the reason that they hadn't implemented it wasn't that they didn't like it. It was that it was gotten rid of so quickly after the election